Imagine walking into work on a Monday morning thinking it's going to be another ordinary day. You greet your coworkers. You open your laptop. You check your emails. You make your coffee. Then your boss calls your name. Not privately. Not in his office. Not in a quiet conversation where you can at least defend yourself. He calls your name in front of the entire department. And then he says 4 words that make the room completely silent. You are fired. Today. No warning. No investigation. No chance to explain. Just humiliation. Everyone is staring at you. Some people look shocked. Some look uncomfortable. And one person lowers their eyes because they already know something you don't. But here's the part my boss didn't know. 3 days later, he would be standing in the same office, looking at me and begging me to come back. But why? What changed in only 72 hours? What did he discover after I walked out of that building? And why did the same people who watched me get fired suddenly start calling my phone? This isn't just a story about getting revenge on a bad boss. It's about knowing your value when someone in authority tries to make you feel worthless. Because sometimes, the moment people think they've destroyed you is the exact moment they reveal how much they actually depended on you. And what happened over the next 3 days taught me a lesson I will never forget. So stay with me. Because the reason my boss fired me in front of everyone was not the real reason. The real reason was much bigger. And by the time he realized his mistake, it was already too late. Chapter 1. The job I thought I was lucky to have. 2 to 8 o'clock. My name is Robert. At least, that's what we'll call me for this story. I had worked at a company called Meridian Solutions for almost 4 years. It wasn't my dream job, but it was stable, good salary, decent benefits, a comfortable office, and, most importantly, I had built a reputation there. I wasn't the loudest employee. I wasn't the person who stayed late just to be seen. I wasn't interested in office politics. I simply did my job, and I did it well. My department handled client operations. Basically, when something went wrong between the company and an important client, my team was often the group responsible for fixing it. That meant deadlines, reports, technical problems, client complaints, data analysis, emergency calls, and occasionally cleaning up mistakes made by people above us. That last part became important later. At the time, I didn't think much of it. I thought that was just how corporate life worked. You solve problems. You get paid. You go home. Simple. My direct manager was a man named Richard. Richard had been promoted to department director about 8 months before everything happened. He was intelligent, confident, extremely ambitious, and very good at making senior executives believe he was responsible for everything that went right. There was only one problem. He wasn't particularly interested in understanding how things actually worked. He was interested in results, numbers, appearances, praise, and promotions. At first, I didn't care. As long as he stayed out of my way, we could coexist. But then something changed. Our company landed one of the biggest contracts in its history. A multinational client. Millions of dollars. Strict deadlines. Extremely sensitive data. And because I had experience with the company's internal systems, Richard assigned me as one of the technical leads. I was proud. I thought this could finally be the project that moved my career forward. And that's where I made my first mistake. I assumed hard work would always protect me. It doesn't. Hard work matters. But visibility matters too. Documentation matters. Relationships matter. And sometimes, unfortunately, politics matters. That's one of the uncomfortable truths about workplaces. Being good at your job and being protected from workplace politics are two completely different things. I learned that the hard way. Chapter 2. The First Warning. 8 to 1400 hours. The first strange thing happened about 6 weeks before I was fired. It was a Tuesday afternoon. Richard called me into his office. He closed the door. That alone was unusual. He sat behind his desk and asked me to make a change to the project report. I opened the report on my laptop. He pointed to a section showing several unresolved technical issues. He wanted them removed. I immediately knew what he was asking. He wanted the report to look cleaner. But there was a problem. Those issues were connected to the client's delivery schedule. If we removed them from the report, management would assume everything was on track. I explained that I could mark them as pending resolution, but I didn't think we should remove them. Richard wasn't happy. He told me that sometimes I needed to understand the bigger picture. I told him I did understand the bigger picture. That's why I was concerned. The conversation ended there, but I didn't make the change. Instead, I sent him an email explaining exactly why those issues needed to remain documented. I kept the message professional. No emotion, no accusations, just facts. And I saved a copy. That little decision would become extremely important. Because here's a life fact worth remembering. When you're dealing with conflict at work, emotions disappear from memory faster than documentation does. People may forget what they said. They may deny what they asked you to do. But a time-stamped email can remember everything. I didn't know it then. But that email was about to become one of the most valuable things I had ever written. Over the next few weeks, things became increasingly chaotic. Deadlines started slipping. The client began asking questions. Some technical problems weren't being resolved. And every time I raised a concern, Richard told me not to worry about it. But I was worried because I could see what was coming. The project had dependencies. One system couldn't be completed until another system was configured. That system couldn't be tested until the data migration was finished. And the migration couldn't be completed until the client approved the data structure. It was a chain. If one link broke, everything behind it moved. That's how complex projects work. You don't have to be incompetent to fail. Sometimes one ignored dependency is enough. I started documenting everything. Every meeting, every requested change, every deadline, every technical issue, every approval. Not because I was planning revenge. I was protecting the project. At least, that's what I told myself. Then, one Friday afternoon, the client sent an email. The message was polite, but the meaning was serious. They wanted an emergency meeting with senior management. Richard forwarded the message to me. His only instruction was to fix it. I stared at the screen. What exactly was I supposed to fix? The project? The missed deadlines? The decisions I had warned him about? The issues he told me not to document? I replied that I could help identify the technical blockers, but several of those issues required management decisions. He didn't respond. The following Monday, something strange happened. Richard stopped speaking to me directly. He started communicating through other managers. Then he began excluding me from meetings. At first, I thought maybe he was simply angry. But eventually I realized something much more dangerous. He wasn't just angry. He was building a story, and I was about to become the villain in it. A week later, I received an invitation to a meeting. The subject was Project Performance Review. There were 7 people on the invitation. Richard, 2 senior managers, a finance representative, someone from compliance, 2 project leads, and me. I knew immediately this wasn't a normal meeting. When I walked into the room, Richard was already there. His laptop was open. Documents were spread across the table. He didn't look at me. The meeting started. One of the senior managers asked why we were behind schedule. Richard answered before anyone else could speak. He blamed execution problems on the technical side. I immediately understood what that meant. He was pointing toward me. He began listing missed deadlines, incomplete reports, communication failures, delayed testing. I listened. Some were real problems, but they weren't caused by me. Others were completely misleading. Then Richard claimed I was responsible for coordinating the technical deliverables. Technically, that was true, but coordinating wasn't the same as controlling every dependency. I opened my laptop. I had the emails, meeting notes, approval records, timestamps. I presented them one by one. The room became quiet. Someone asked Richard if he had been aware of these blockers. He admitted that he had. That single answer changed the atmosphere. Because if he knew about the blockers, why had he blamed me for them? The meeting ended without a decision. But I knew something was coming. And I was right. 3 days later, Richard called me into his office. Chapter 5, The Firing. 27:00, 34:00. It was Monday morning. I had barely sat down when I was called into the conference room. Richard was standing near the window. 3 managers were sitting at the table. Nobody smiled. Nobody offered me a seat. Then Richard told me the company had decided to terminate my employment. I thought I had misheard him. I asked why. He said it was because of performance issues. I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, because the accusation was so absurd. I had 4 years of performance reviews. No formal warnings. No disciplinaria de acción. No written complaint. And now, suddenly, performance issues. I asked why I hadn't been given a warning. Richard simply told me management had made its decision. Then came the part one still remember. He opened the conference room door. People were outside. My coworkers. My entire department. Richard instructed me to collect my personal belongings and leave the premises. Everyone heard it. Nobody moved. I could feel the embarrassment spreading through my body. My face was hot. My hands were shaking. And for a few seconds, I wanted to argue. I wanted to shout. I wanted to expose everything. But I didn't. I simply nodded, packed my laptop bag, collected my notebook, and walked past everyone. One coworker quietly expressed sympathy. Another wouldn't even look at me. I reached the elevator. The doors closed. And for the first time in 4 years, I was alone. Here's something nobody tells you about humiliation. The moment itself is usually shorter than the story your mind tells afterward. The firing took less than 5 minutes. But I replayed those 5 minutes for hours. What could I have said? What should I have done? Why me? What would I tell my family? What would happen next? Then something unexpected happened. My phone vibrated. It was an email from a client. And when I opened it, I realized Richard had made a catastrophic mistake. The email was addressed to me. The client wanted to know who would be handling the technical transition now that I was no longer with the project. I stared at the screen. They knew. Apparently, they had been told I was removed from the project. But they weren't asking why. They were asking who would replace me. And that question exposed something Richard had forgotten. The client didn't just know my name. They trusted me. I had been the person explaining the technical issues to them. I had been translating complicated system problems into language their executives could understand. I had built relationships, and relationships are a form of professional capital. You can't always see them on a balance sheet, but when something goes wrong, you suddenly discover their value. I didn't respond immediately. I wanted to make sure I didn't violate any company policies. So I contacted an employment advisor and explained what had happened. I preserved my records. I returned company property. I didn't access any systems. And I didn't sabotage anything. That distinction matters. Revenge is emotional. Strategy is controlled. I decided I wasn't going to destroy the company. I was simply going to let the truth speak for itself. The next morning, I received another email. This time from someone inside Meridian. It said they needed to talk. I recognized the sender. It was one of the senior managers who had been in the room when I was fired. I called. He sounded nervous. He admitted that Richard hadn't told them everything. That sentence changed everything. Chapter 7, The Second Day. 40:00, 46:00. By Tuesday afternoon, I had learned what happened after I left. The project had almost stopped. The team couldn't complete several technical tasks because they didn't know the process I had built. Some documentation existed, but documentation isn't the same as experience. Think about it. You can have a map of a city. That doesn't mean you've walked its streets. I had spent years learning the company's systems. I knew which processes were fragile, which integrations failed under heavy traffic, which client approvals took longer, which seemingly small changes could create huge problems. That knowledge was never written in one place. It was inside my head. And Richard had removed the person who understood the system without creating a transition plan. The client had also become concerned. They requested a meeting with senior management. Apparently, someone finally asked why I had been removed when the project was already behind schedule. That was the question Richard didn't want. And then another email appeared. This one was from the CEO's office. They wanted my project records, not company files, my documented communications, my reports, my meeting notes, the evidence I had created while trying to protect the project. Suddenly, the same documentation Richard had considered unnecessary had become critical. Life has a strange way of rewarding patience. Sometimes you don't win by fighting harder. Sometimes you win by remaining calm long enough for the truth to catch up with everyone. By Tuesday night, I thought the situation couldn't get any stranger. I was wrong, because Wednesday morning, at exactly 8:17 a.m., my phone rang. The caller ID showed Meridian Solutions. It was Richard, but this time, he didn't sound powerful. He sounded worried. Richard wanted to talk. I knew immediately that it was about the project. 3 days earlier, the project had supposedly been failing because of me. Now, they needed me to discuss it. Richard explained that there had been unexpected developments. Then he asked if I would be willing to come back temporarily. For a moment, I didn't say anything. Come back? After being fired in front of everyone? After being blamed for problems I had warned management about? After being publicly humiliated? I realized something in that moment. My value hadn't changed. Their perception had. And that's an important life lesson. Never let someone else's temporary opinion become your permanent measurement of your worth. People can underestimate you. Managers can overlook you. Companies can replace you. But your skills, experience, character, and knowledge don't disappear because somebody failed to recognize them. Richard explained that the company needed my expertise. I wanted to know why. He admitted that I was the only person who knew how to stabilize the technical side quickly. That answer told me everything. The same person who had supposedly been the reason for the project's problems was now the person they needed to save it. But I wasn't interested in revenge. I was interested in protecting myself. So I made one condition. If the company wanted me back, they needed to put the offer in writing. Richard was silent. He had expected me to simply say yes. He had expected desperation. Instead, I gave him professionalism, and that changed the balance of power. That afternoon, an email arrived. The company wanted me back, but there were conditions. A new contract, temporary consulting status, a higher rate, clear authority over the technical transition, and direct communication with senior management. I read it twice. Then I noticed something. Richard's name wasn't on the approval line. The CEO's office had taken over. That meant the situation had moved far beyond Richard. He had tried to make me the problem. Instead, his decision had triggered a deeper investigation. I accepted the consulting arrangement, not because I needed Richard's approval, not because I wanted to humiliate him, and certainly not because I wanted revenge. I accepted because it was professionally fair. I returned to the building the following morning. The same elevator, the same hallway, the same people, but everything felt different. Some coworkers smiled. One quietly welcomed me back. I walked toward the conference room. Richard was inside. He stood when I entered. He looked uncomfortable, and then he apologized. I didn't celebrate. I didn't insult him. I simply focused on the work. Because sometimes the strongest revenge isn't making someone suffer. It's becoming successful without becoming bitter. But there was still something I hadn't discovered, something hidden in the records I had preserved. And that discovery was about to change everything. Final reveal, 57:00, 59:00. The documents I had kept weren't just proof that Richard knew about the technical problems. They contained something else. A file, a spreadsheet, a series of approvals, and one name that appeared repeatedly. Richard's. The same person who had blamed me for the project's problems had personally approved several of the decisions that created them. And there was something even more shocking. One of those approvals had been made the morning before he fired me. That meant Richard didn't suddenly discover I was incompetent. He knew I wasn't. He fired me because he needed someone to carry the blame. But why was he so desperate to protect himself? Who was he trying to impress? And what was hidden inside those financial records? I would find out soon. And when I did, the situation became much bigger than one employee and one angry boss. Because the person who ultimately exposed Richard wasn't me. It was someone sitting much higher in the company. Someone who had been watching everything from the beginning. And that person's identity changes the entire story. Life lessons. 59:00, 60:00. If there is one thing I want you to take from this story, it's this. Don't confuse losing a position with losing your value. A job is something you have. Your skills are something you build. Your character is something you protect. And your reputation is something you should never destroy just because somebody else behaved badly. Second, document important conversations. Not because you're paranoid, because memory is unreliable. Facts are stronger when they are written down. Third, don't react when you're angry. Anger wants immediate revenge. Wisdom wants a better outcome. And finally, never underestimate what happens when you quietly become indispensable. The person nobody notices today may be the person everyone needs tomorrow. Richard thought firing me would end the problem. Instead, it exposed the problem. And 3 days later, he was the one asking me to come back. But trust me, that was only the beginning. Because in part 2, I'll reveal what was inside the financial records, who had been secretly investigating Richard, and why my return to the company triggered an even bigger confrontation. And there's one detail in those records that could completely change how you see Richard. So if you want to know what happened next, watch out for part 2.